So, hello, and thank you for having me here. Last night, so the lecture kicked off January the 10th, and the first Friday, which is great because we all, still try to go to live in chores, and then Sundays you after church. Friday, and so I jumped in the car and drove and turned on a very important Star Trek rerun. And he tomorrow's presentation. Just a little icon link, and I tap on it, and here's this event. And so by now it's like 7 or so, at 7:30. So I called Joe, and it was really funny. Terry was in the other room. She said, "What was that about?" I could tell there was a real serious discussion going on. I thought something bad had happened. And I called Joe, and I said, "Joe, I don't know anything about this." And so I said, "Yeah." Get with Ashley, my chief staff, put on the calendar. Well, we were transition. You lose your office at Thanksgiving, and so we have an office in the Capitol, and so somehow it never made it to the email. Joe sent it, and so 3:30 this morning, I got up, and so if I'm kind of phasing in and out here, I want you to understand. There are a couple hours of things I had to do, and then I got on the road and got here and just drove in. And I did decide, though, if I was coming, I was not. So forgive the blue jeans, but I can only go far. I will say this, and I kind of tell that story for this reason. I really can't think of any other person or any other organization done that for. And I say that with y'all have had such an amazing impact on life in Texas and across the United States. And since I have nothing prepared, I just want to talk about that a minute, if I can. And so this is going to be purely from the heart at this point, as I bluff my way through the next 15 minutes. But in all sincerity, Joe mentioned 1999. And as we look at today where elective abortions are illegal in Texas, and we have gone from having, just a couple of years ago, 70,000 abortions a year just in our state to virtually none, at least not legally done in our state. And I was thinking, and he was mentioning back in 1999. And in 1999, we still had, the House was a Democrat majority House, had a Republican Senate, which was George W. Bush, and considering running for president. And we really had no anti-abortion laws on the books. I think we had a kind of weak, if I remember, third prohibition at that time, but that was really pretty much it. And there were ways around it, I think, as I recall. And so the idea was, can we at least maybe get parental notice passed? And we looked around the state, and I remember working with Joe back then, and he told me that in every other state where they passed this, there weren't very many, that they had seen teenage abortion drop about 20% just like that. Just because kids had to tell their parents get involved, and not only would sometimes the parents not want them to get an abortion, but just the fact they were going to have to tell somebody there's accountability, kids were taking precautions, being more cautious. And remember back then we had school counselors driving, 16-year-old, 15-year-old girls to get an abortion during the school day, and all these type of things were going on. And we had this one chance to get this bill through. And I'll tell you, if George Bush had not really had a good relationship with some of the leading Democrats in the House, we couldn't even have got the door cracked to do that. It was very difficult, and the pro-life groups, frankly, were not all on the same page either. I can remember that. We probably ought to start a maxim that says 5 pro-lifers, 25 ideas and positions, and everybody was a little bit different. We were getting criticized, strongly criticized, because if you put on the books that you can't get an abortion without a teenager, without their parents' permission, that will be construed to say it's okay to get an abortion if you get your parents' permission. And I kind of understand that, but we actually had that, and we're just saying, no, we can't stop abortion completely. And they wanted bills just to stop abortion completely. We said, one, we can't pass something like that. Even if we did, it would be immediately overturned. We'd rather really do something that at least saves some babies' lives, and we know that this will reduce teenage abortions by about 20% a year, because it's done that in other states. But people were not on the same page. It took until the end of session to get that passed. And we even had to come back and clean it up the next legislative session on a few things in it. My point in all that is looking at what we struggled with then. I know it's so discouraging for us sometimes, because we say we've been in this fight so long, now we just thought we had a giant victory. Now we're having all the other things come back in with the pills and the Biden administration and the VA clinics and all these things, and it gets real discouraging. But guys, think about from where we have come. Think about that in 1999, we were fighting with all we had just to get it to where a parent had to be notified before their 14-year-old daughter could get an abortion, to where we are today that elective abortion in Texas is illegal. That's an amazing move. And we went through stages. The idea was we knew we couldn't win this legislatively. We knew, y'all knew, Joe's counsel, his team's counsel. We knew that you could not win this. We would love to win the baseball game with a grand slam, but we knew that wasn't going to happen. The courts, the electorate, the votes in the House and the Senate, concerns that were very heartfelt on both sides. And so the idea was, I hate to use, because this minimizes the importance of this issue, but you win baseball games with base hits, and we knew we were going to have to win this one base at a time. And so everyone working together. The next thing was, a few years later, we put in place parental consent, which said, no, instead of notifying your parents, you have to get a parent actually to sign a notarized affidavit. Then after we passed that, then we fight the Health and Human Services Department literally for 18 months, just because everybody was arguing over what the form should say. Because the pro-abortion community, if nothing else, are very creative and are good at blocking things. Over the years to come, we began to put in funding for alternatives to abortion, which has grown to $100 million in our 2-year budget that we have now, which is amazing. We have, of course, after parental consent came in place, as we moved forward, we did the sonogram, we did the waiting period, we did protections for the type of health care, of safeties that had to be there. It was very much a slow process and sometimes very, very discouraging. Ultimately, up until this last session, we just had 2021, we had such an amazing year when we dealt with the abortion by mail. We put tremendous restrictions in on that, which I don't think we ever envisioned how badly we were going to need that statute. And we put strong, that statute's in pretty strong order. It's going to need to be strengthened a lot, though, we're finding. We put in place the trigger bill. Nobody ever imagining that the trigger would be pulled so quickly, right? We put in place the heartbeat bill, which really began something in motion that moved nationwide toward the Supreme Court. And so here we are today, and somewhere in Texas, there's 50,000 more babies going to be born this year than were born, than would have been otherwise. Now we have a whole new, now we have a whole new set of issues, a whole new set of problems. And I want to say this in the strongest terms. We being the church at large, Pastor, we have really got to step up, because we've got a lot of new mothers, young mothers, some not so young, but we've got a lot of people out there that would have gone and received an abortion, which is a terrible tragedy. But now they've got or are going to have this little baby. And we have got to go beyond working against abortion, and we've got to work more and more for these young mothers. And we've got to let people see Christ in what we're doing. Because we've always talked, our question has always been, when people said, yes, but what about the mother? Our response was always, yes, we are so sympathetic to her position, but what about the baby? Now we've got to start saying, what about the mother? And if I'm just telling you, legislatively, if you want to put tools in the toolbox for abortion restrictions to be reduced in any state, it's when they come back up and point to say, see this young mother who's living under abuse or who's abusing this young babe, this child, see this child that's living in squalor, see these things happening. Though, if that becomes the culture, those are arguments for the other side to use, aside from the fact that we don't want those terrible things to happen. I think it is so imperative I've met with a bunch of pastors over the last year or so talking about how they have got to help recreate a culture of adoption within their local body and within their community. And I met with, we put together a working group last year, and here, and we put together a national group for legislators from around the country, and we were looking at ways to try to streamline adoption. And what I was shocked at is the people that are really in the adoption business, the institutional clinics. They were adamant that they do not expect to see any more babies in large numbers put up for adoption. And that just stunned me, because we're going to have all these new babies in Texas, and why wouldn't there now suddenly be a lot more opportunities for children placed up for adoption? And so then started asking, people of childbearing age, and they affirmed what the institutions were telling me, is that we have so taken the culture of adoption out of our lives, out of society, that if someone has an unplanned pregnancy, there's really only two things that come into their mind. One is an abortion, and the other is keeping the child, which keeping the child is a wonderful alternative. I know Buckner's Children's Home have moved to where they're all focused on family reunification right now and family building, and that's a wonderful, wonderful ministry in trying to respond to that. But adoption just doesn't come into mind, and so we have to build that back into our culture, and I think the way you begin to do that is in the churches, and because life has always come out of Christ and always out of the churches. So I think that's where we have to do that. We have to build that into our communities. We also have to. We looked at ways to streamline adoption. It's very difficult, particularly if it's in the foster care situation, which is so bureaucratic, and we really came up with a lot of. I think we're going to make some advances in that area, but it's tough because it is such a large and bureaucratic system. And then the private adoptions, I'm just hoping they'll evolve. We looked at it, that it's an expensive process. I mean, it's hard to, if you've got this young couple and there's a 19-year-old or 16-year-old young lady in their church, and she is pregnant and she would love to give this baby up for adoption, and they want to do this, and they're 28 years old, and it's going to cost $25,000, and they just don't have $25,000. But there's opportunities for our churches to step up and help with that. I don't think it should be something in terms of a welfare process or anything like that, because it's the state involved and all kind of confusion. But I think there's wonderful opportunities. Some of the recent Supreme Court decisions that have come down lately that deal with tax funds being used in faith-based ministries and schools and things like that are much broader in their application than most people realize. I think the field is open now from a constitutional law standpoint. The field is open for there to be churches open up clinics, adoption clinics, and healthcare clinics even in their communities, and to even merge state dollars that we might be able to provide through alternatives to abortion and things like that to come in and help pay for things where before we couldn't blend. You know, like our crisis pregnancy centers were always uncomfortable. Some of them didn't want to take the state funding that was available because they were afraid it would, and concerned it would restrict them from praying or sharing the gospel or ministering to their patient in the way that they wanted to. Those concerns are now gone from a legal standpoint, from constitutional law. Those state dollars that could come in through alternatives to abortion and go to a faith-based clinic, maybe operating out of your church pastor or something. There's no danger now that you can't try to help that person where they're at and also tell them about Jesus. You're not prohibited from doing that. We're going to have to go through a few more, I think, lawsuits to make sure everybody understands that, but that is the case. So I think we've really got to step up to the plate on this. I will tell you, I think the legislature is very firm in holding on to the prohibitions that we have in place. There are people, Republicans and Democrats, who are very concerned over the rape incest issue, and we have to, in a gracious and way, help them understand that from the baby's perspective, that not only can it open the door for claims that didn't really occur, not that rape and incest is not the horror of horrors, and pregnancies do sometimes come from those. But probably more often than we think in a date rape setting. But at the same time, we still have to ask the question, but what about the baby? And so I think we're going to have to be patient and encouraging if you see a Republican or a Democrat state legislator who has been very supportive on pro-life measures. If they're beginning to wonder about that, I think we need to just help them work through and think through that process and come to the right conclusion that, yes, all of those are the most horrible. I have 5 daughters and 10 grandbabies, girls, and the thought of them in that situation from a sexual assault terrifies me and breaks my heart even to think about it. But at the same time, as horrible as that is, we also have to think about the baby. And sometimes there's just not good answers to things. But I think we're going to have to be patient and help people lovingly work through that and think through that. And so that's how I would encourage you to do that, to always remember as that issue comes up, and I think that's the most likely one to come up this session, always remember to speak the truth, but always speak it with a great deal of grace, right? And because people are kind of working through that. So with that said, again, I just want to thank your organization. Everybody in here, I'm guessing, has probably written a check at one time or another, and thank you for doing that. Alliance for Life has a tremendous impact, not just in Texas, but I believe across the country, because of what happens here. Moves to other states and certainly moves toward our federal and appellate courts and Supreme Court. I don't know if there's time, Joe. I'd be happy to answer a question about anything if you wanted to. I'm happy to do that. If I stagger a little bit, just hand me the coffee. Take it away. I think we got one person.
Anyone have a question?
Here. Got one right back here, yes. Ma'am.
First of all, thank you for all that you've done and continue to do, and you too, Joe. But
let me tell you, it's nothing but a blessing and an honor.
Do we have any idea about what's happening with medical abortions? I know that surgical abortions have ceased, But it seems to me that there's a lot of reporting that medical abortions have increased by 80%, that women are having emergencies, showing up in the emergency rooms hemorrhaging or having horrific problems resulting from medical abortions. And I know that it's illegal to send through the mail, but how do we control that?
Yeah, and Alliance for Life was very smart in trying to get out on this in 2021 in the legislative session and put in place prohibitions on what was being called mail order abortion. It's very dangerous, as you know, to do the medical abortion without all the follow-ups and everything that come in there. And there's a lot of terrible stories about what have happened to people who have done an abortion in that manner. But we thought we had it outlawed, but now the Biden administration is really working against that, and they're talking about trying to make it to where you can purchase the drugs over the counter. Anecdotally, I'm hearing the same thing you're hearing, that not only are people going to other states, which we expected. I talked to a legislator from Kansas. She told me you can't believe how many Texans they see coming to Kansas for an abortion. We expected that, but anecdotally, I'm hearing of people getting on a kind of a teledoc type situation with a doctor in another state, having pills mailed to them, or going to another state to get the medications and bringing them back here. We're hearing anecdotally of drugs just being brought in illegally, just like so many other illegal narcotics are. That the RU-46 and whatever other drugs are used are coming in that way as well. It's hard to have good information on that because it is illegal and under the wire. But there are discussions on how to deal with that, and I know that a number of the Right to Life groups, I know Alliance as well, is trying to figure out how you do that. I mean, how do we in Texas restrict a doctor in another state from issuing that medication? How do we keep things from coming in the mail that we don't know are coming in the mail from another country even? And so it is a tough thing. But here's what I want to tell you. If we don't get out in front of that, and I know there's some concerns, should we try to get out in front or kind of see how it's going to work out, or do we really want to open that Pandora's box right now? But I'm just telling you, if we don't get out in front of that, I'm afraid a couple of years from now we're going to look back and go, I thought we outlawed abortion in Texas, and it looks like we didn't, because now and we're going to see we're going to have some horrible stories of ladies and young women and kids that did a medically induced abortion without proper medical care and everything else. We're going to have some terrible, terrible outcomes, I fear, of death and certainly of serious, serious illness. And so I think we've got to find a way to get out in front of that. But it's very hard. It's going to be very difficult, particularly with an underground market for that. And again, we don't have all the facts, but we just keep hearing everywhere that's occurring.
Once again, thank you for all your work.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you. I'd like to know about any kind of fatherhood initiative. It takes two, and it's important now, I feel like, that we really home in on the fathers and give them some support or find a way to educate them on parenting and their involvement, whether they are with the mother of the child or not. But they need some help and education. And the other thing has to do with the black community and how are we homing in on how do we change the fact that more black women are having abortion than any other race for the population.
Yeah, I was speaking to someone else about this the other day that kind of asked the same thing. And the only thing I can go back to is you can't legislate for everything. We can't legislate we can't legislate to make young men take into account what having sexual intercourse with someone they're not married to may end up with. We can't legislate to make fathers step up and be the fathers and not abandon someone and put them in a situation where they begin to think about abortion where they otherwise may have never thought of that if they knew the father was going to be there. I just want to go back to this. I'm telling you, the churches, this is the role of the church. I mean, the role of the church is to introduce people to Jesus Christ and then to disciple them. And if you look back at history, everything throughout history that has ever been a big cultural shift, it didn't come from the government down. It came from the church up. Whether it was the abolitionist movement, which was very, very much a Christ-centered movement, or whether it's been work laws for children, whether anything you can think of, education, everything, all those great cultural shifts, the role of women in society, all of these things really were based on the teachings of Jesus and came up through there, and the teaching of our Jewish communities too, up through the Torah and the Old Testament, but it's that Judeo-Christian worldview that has really changed the world. And I just challenge again that everybody in their churches here, you're not going to pass a law and change a young woman or a young guy's hearts. You're going to do that through the church, and the churches have to step up, and they're the ones that are going to have to reach out to these young boys and help them understand the responsibility. But also, you've also got young men who are grieving out there too, because they've been a part of an abortion, and a lot of them are coming to the perspective now. You know, science has kind of won out a lot on this too. It's really hard to not. No one can argue that that's not a baby when you can see such a clear picture. And young men see this too, and older men who've been through an abortion, and I think there's a lot of hurting young men and dads out there, and they need to be reached out to as well. But I'm telling you that this is the day for the church to really step up.
Thank you, Senator, for being here. How would you reply to Republicans or conservatives that feel the Dobbs decision cost them the election or cost votes in the last election? Or even do you agree with them, or what do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I think, first off, I can't really point to anybody that I can't really point to any election that was lost because of that in Texas. I understand nationally, you know, we're all kind of surprised by the last election cycle and the presidential election cycle too back, and there's no question that Dobbs had a big role in that. But you know, we shouldn't be surprised at that, okay? Because again, abortion had become such a part of our culture, and so, but I don't know of anybody in Texas that lost their election because of that. I got some calls from some good friends and supporters who are very concerned that Texas had gone too far, particularly on rape and incest, or particularly on first trimester and things like that. And we just had to have some polite, hard discussions, you know. And they probably will never vote for me again. But again, I think if we step up as a community, as a Right to Life community, and if we're able to say, look at this wonderful situation with adoption we've built and have going. Look at this wonderful story of this of how the Crisis Pregnancy Center has moved into ministering to young mothers with unplanned pregnancies more and more, and shifted their efforts to that because they weren't having to fight abortion. I think if we have evidence of that, I think people want to see that we have a solution other than I don't think anybody likes other than a very small group of people. Nobody thinks abortion is good. So we've got to show them that the alternatives to it are occurring and that they're successful. And I think that's our real challenge, and it's a big challenge.
Thank you for your comments earlier about the adoption expenses, and I know what you do for your private practice. So a workman is worthy of their hire, but it seems like legal fees are the biggest part of that. Is there anything that could be done legislatively to protect the mother who's trying to give the child? Because I think that takes up a lot of the lion's share of that, is putting some ironclad documents over and over again to provide those sort of protections. I'm trying to understand why the legal fees are so high, and that seems to be the biggest thing.
I think it's not just the legal fees. I think that's a big piece of it. And I'll tell you the first thing, I hadn't done a private adoption in 20 years. But in checking around, I mean, I think the legal fees are part of it, but they may get to be $4,000 or $5,000. But it's all the other costs that gets rolled in, the home studies, the follow-up home studies, the medical care that sometimes gets to be a part of that package. It's everything, and it's the complexity of it as well. And I'll tell you a funny story. I'm sorry, kind of anecdotally, to show you how far it's come. And I'm not saying this is the way adoption should be, but I had a couple of friends, ladies, they're friends now, that came to my office years ago, and they needed some legal work. And they said they were sisters, and I knew one of them, didn't know the other one. And so I'm getting some basic information I needed for it, and part of it was their date of birth, and I realized, wow, they're born about 6 months apart. So I'm assuming stepsisters, half-sisters, something like that. Here was the story. Their mother, and they're in their 40s by then. So this is going to be circa 1960 or so. Their mother and father, well, one of the girls, biological mother and father, 19-year-old kids, right out of high school, new baby. You can kind of figure how that came about. New baby, newly married. They're driving through Hyco, Texas. And they pull into a gas station to get gas. Mom goes into the bathroom, and there is a newborn baby, umbilical cord attached, in the restroom floor. And so they don't know what to do. They get the attendant. He said there was a car full of some ladies that pulled up here earlier. They stayed a while. He goes, I just thought one of them might have been sick or something. Didn't really pay much attention. I hadn't been in there since they left. They just left a few minutes ago. So they don't know what to do. They call the police. Police don't know what to do. They go to the hospital. They disconnect the umbilical cord. And so so there wasn't any facilities. So the parents just said, well, we'll keep her overnight. And the police said, well, come to the courthouse tomorrow. Well, naturally, overnight, they fall in love with the baby, right? So they go to the courthouse the next morning in Erath County, Hyco, Texas. Wonderful place. And they go in to see the judge. They say, Judge, we'd like to adopt this baby. And he's looking at them. They're a 19-year-old couple with a newborn in arms. And he says, y'all look like a nice young couple. If y'all just pay the filing fees, we'll just do this right now. And now I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but today it would be CPS, criminal investigations. They probably would have arrested the parents or the people who found her. It just gets really complex. And we put together a work group to try to find ways to streamline those private adoptions. And what we kept running into is the fact that there aren't that many, and there's a long list of people ready today to pay whatever it costs in a private adoption. They just can't find a baby on the list that's available. And it all got back to the fact that we have got to build a culture of adoption so that people know when they're in a difficult situation that is a loving option, and that there's going to be people in their church, in their community, or in organizations that are going to come in around them and help them through that. Because right now there just aren't any. There is a long list of people ready to adopt babies. And that doesn't even get into our babies with disabilities and everything else. That's a whole nother section over there. So. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Thank you for being here. Could you tell us, because I have not had a chance to look, but could you tell us what kind of legislation or bills are in place to make sure that the insurance companies are not going to be supporting any kind of illegal abortions? And also, I know with our states and the laws that we pass here, and I know the federal government is trying to push its preference on us, Do you feel that our legislature is strong enough to push back, not just legally, but just to stand up and say these are the laws in Texas, that we are going to follow the laws in Texas and that our government cannot overstep the boundaries there?
Okay, kind of three questions there. If I let me start with the one that Joe alluded to in his, or didn't allude to, talked about in his introductory remarks, is where we have a number of cities telling their law enforcement that you will not investigate an illegal abortion case, and then other cities going further than that and trying to do a charter in San Antonio and things like that. So, first off, cities do not have the authority to do that. If we've passed a state law that says, and we're having this problem in other areas, by the way, where a district attorney may say, I'm not going to prosecute any one county district attorney said, I'm not going to prosecute any cases for shoplifting for anything that's $750 or less, I believe it was. And aside from the bad idea that is, because all it basically does is say, go shoplift anything you want up to $750. And you've seen on probably some of the newscasts, people running in and doing these raids into stores. That's what that leads to. And that's the whole thing. But the fundamental issue behind that is the same one in the abortion thing. The state of Texas, the legislature, is the policymaker. We're the ones that write statutes. That's our branch of government. The police are the executive branch. They are to carry out the laws. And the prosecutors and the judges are the judicial branch. And the prosecutors are supposed to prosecute the laws that the criminal laws that the legislature put in place, and then judges, of course, rule on the facts and apply the law. So we've got that problem all over the state, where there are a number of very liberal prosecutors who are refusing to prosecute different offenses, from different types of drugs to other things. Some of it, now we want them to have discretion because they have case-by-case discretion. There's different situations and they have workload they can't keep up with and all that. But just blanket saying, we will not prosecute this category of crime or this category of illegal act, I don't believe they have the lawful authority to do that. And so we've got a whole discussion on, and the abortion is obviously a piece of that, but so are other things. So that's a whole thing we're struggling with now, because they're constitutional offices, you're prosecuting attorneys, and as that, they have a lot of independence. And so we're struggling with that on a lot of things. The other piece of that was, what was the other part of that question? Insurance companies. Joe is probably better to address that, but my presumption is that if anyone does anything to assist in an abortion, that they become a party to that illegal act, just like under the heartbeat bill, and that under the heartbeat bill someone could file suit against them for that act. And it also, because it is now illegal to do an abortion, if it's a doctor or a hospital or anyone else that facilitates that, not the mother, but that anyone else that facilitates it could be prosecuted as well under that criminal statute. So I think an insurance company would be criminally liable and subject to lawsuit if they paid for an abortion in Texas. Sorry, sometimes I got to kind of think through that stuff when we're talking through it.
I hesitate to bring this up, but I will anyway.
Every time somebody says that, I'm always thinking, then wait for the next speaker.
Yeah. And I agree, or the next month. But anyway, the thing about cleaning up everything and tightening up the loose ends, is there something in place to kind of clean up CPS?
So I get as many calls and complaints about CPS as anything, as well as requests for help from CPS. Sadly, and I think it's a product of our kind of culture of death and violence that's grown up over the decades that there's a lot of children being neglected and a lot of children being abused, and it's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. All I can tell you is we have every session we try to do things to help CPS. It is a gigantic organization, it and the whole foster care system. It is a tremendously difficult job. We have trouble keeping people there. A few years back, we just upped their salaries dramatically because we couldn't get people in the position, so you never got people in there. It's a very hard and a very complex thing. The courts are involved. You've got a lot of bad people they're dealing with. We all have stories, probably I do, of people who had anonymous complaints raised against them, and they're a wonderful family, but then they had to go through all kind of issues. I had a good friend, big homeschool leader, called me and said, "Hey, Phil, I just got a call. They're from CPS, and they want to come in and interview me. Should I get a lawyer, or what should I do?" And I said, "Well, here's the test. Call them back and say, 'Do I need a lawyer?' And their response will be, 'Why? What are you hiding?'" And he called me back and he said, "That's exactly what they said." And so, I mean, it's sometimes kind of we, them, but there's also a lot of really good people in that organization really trying to do a good job. It's just a tough job. And I'm just telling you, there will be tons of legislation this time, and we will do some things to tweak it, help them, give them more money, do a lot of things, and we're still going to run into a lot of problems. And a couple of times probably that I've been in the legislature, at least once I remember, we did this just gigantic reshuffling and rewrite and redo of the whole system, and it just does. I'm convinced part of the problem is that the courts are not, and the state is not ever going to be very good at dealing with families. That's really a role for the church and the family. But when no one else is, then the state has to intervene. You know, the way I see it, God created three big institutions for society: the church, the family, and the government. Each one of them's got their own lane, right? And when one of them steps into the other's lane, sometimes it gets to be a problem. When the state steps into the church's lane, it's a problem. When the state steps into the family lane, but sometimes the state is having to step into that family lane and deal with these children, and it's never going to be good, and we just always got to keep working at it to make it as good as we can. But I don't have any real good answers on that.
Okay, with that, let us thank State Senator Bill King.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thank you.